Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night podcast. Story 1. The Basement Butcher. In the mid-1970s, the city of Chicago presented a standard picture of America. Quiet neighborhoods, bustling industrial areas, and trustworthy neighbors. But hidden beneath that facade was a terrifying darkness, and the man who carried it was utterly unremarkable. John Wayne Gacy was not a recluse. He was a successful small businessman in construction, an active community volunteer, and most famously, Pogo the Clown, who frequently performed at children's parties and charity events. Gacy was well liked by everyone. He even took a photo with First Lady Rosalind Carter at a political event. Gacy used his trusted persona and his job to approach his victims. He often targeted young, vulnerable boys and men, luring them with promises of work or money. He would invite them back to his house in the Norwood Park neighborhood, a small, neat home nestled among others. The case began to unravel in December 1978, when a 15-year-old boy named Robert Peast disappeared after telling his mother he was going to meet Gacy to discuss a job. This was the one victim Gacy could not hide. Police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's house, but even after finding Peast's identification papers, they couldn't locate a body. Gacy was cooperative, too cooperative, but there was a strange stench like mold and chemicals emanating throughout the house. The police focus shifted to the plumbing system and the soil beneath the house. Gacy had previously complained about leakage issues and had done the repairs himself. When police began to dig deeper into the tight crawl space beneath the house, the horrifying truth began to emerge. Gacy ultimately confessed to his crimes. He had murdered 33 boys and young men over a period of 6 years. The vast majority of his victims, 26 people, were found buried right in the cramped space beneath his own floorboards. The remaining bodies were found elsewhere, including dumped in the nearby Des Plaines River. The killer had turned his own home into a mass grave designed to hide his atrocities. He dug the shallow graves, used lime, and buried his victims right beneath where he lived his daily life, beneath the living room carpet where he entertained guests and family. John Wayne Gacy was a dangerous predator who used false kindness and community trust as his weapons. He taught us a chilling lesson. The darkness sometimes doesn't lurk in the woods, but right beneath our feet, under the house of a neighbor we trust. Story 2. The Lake Bodies Killer. In the 1980s, the isolation of America's interstate highways created a perfect environment for a new kind of predator. Larry Eiler was a long-haul truck driver, and his profession provided the perfect cover for his hidden brutality. Larry Eiler was an outwardly normal man working as a truck driver, constantly moving between Indiana and Illinois. He exploited truck stops and roadside hotspots to find his victims, mainly hitchhikers, homeless individuals, and young men in need of money. Eiler began killing around 1982. He was known for his particular savagery, often torturing and sexually abusing his victims before killing them. He used a disturbing and repetitive method of body disposal. He drove to secluded rural areas, often near lakes, rivers, or cornfields in Indiana and Illinois, and left the bodies there. The bodies began appearing at random intervals, often badly decomposed, making identification incredibly difficult. Victims had gone missing from different states, initially preventing police from linking the cases. Area police suspected multiple local killers were at work. In 1983, one of Eiler's victims, Daniel Bridges, was found brutally murdered in a cornfield. Illinois police launched an intense investigation. Despite the brutality of Eiler's crimes, he maintained his cover. He had an apartment in Chicago and a live-in partner who seemed unaware of his horrific double life. The hunt for Eiler lasted for years. The crucial lead came from another case. Eiler was arrested in Illinois in 1984 for assaulting a young man. Although the victim escaped and provided detailed information about Eiler, the forensic evidence at the time was not strong enough to charge him with the murders. It wasn't until 1986, thanks to the persistence of investigators, particularly in Indiana, that they found undeniable evidence. They discovered that Eiler owned a specific white truck, and more importantly, a witness named Robert Rhodes cooperated, eventually pointing out the location of several bodies. Upon his arrest and facing DNA evidence and witness testimony, Eiler pleaded guilty to multiple murders. He promised to reveal the locations of all missing bodies in exchange for a deal. After Eiler died in prison from AIDS in 1990, his lawyer revealed a chilling list. Eiler was responsible for the deaths of at least 23 men and young boys. The case of Larry Eiler showed the terrifying truth that the most dangerous predators are sometimes those who move among us, hidden by the vastness of the highways and the isolation of rural America. He was the Lake Bodies killer, and his terror left deep scars across that wide expanse of land. Story 3. The D.C. Sniper. In the fall of 2002, in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, the atmosphere of peace was shattered by something police initially couldn't comprehend: a series of precise, random, and deadly shootings. Over 3 weeks, 13 people were shot while performing everyday tasks: pumping gas, mowing the lawn, reading a book in a parking lot, or simply waiting for a bus. A total of 10 people died, and 3 were severely wounded. No witnesses saw the shooter. Victims were struck from a distance using a high-powered rifle, and the attacks spanned a wide area across 3 jurisdictions: D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Police initially searched for a lone sniper on rooftops or in high-rise buildings. Fear spread throughout the D.C. area. Schools were closed or required students to run in zigzag patterns between buildings. Gas stations installed large tarps to protect customers while fueling. Daily life came to a standstill due to the unseen, deadly presence of the predator. The crimes were not committed by one person, but a duo. John Allen Muhammad, a 41-year-old Gulf War veteran, and Lee Boyd Malvo, a 17-year-old teen whom Muhammad had brainwashed and trained. Police eventually received a critical lead. A dark blue Chevrolet Caprice had been seen near several crime scenes. But the most crucial clue was the killer's method. They had created a secret small hole in the trunk of the car, allowing one person to lie inside and shoot accurately outward without being seen. Muhammad and Malvo left cryptic clues and notes at some crime scenes, demanding a ransom of $10 million. They referred to themselves as God and the Devil. The manhunt concluded when federal and state police finally identified the blue Caprice. The vehicle was intercepted at a rest stop in Maryland. Both Muhammad and Malvo were found sleeping inside. Police found the Bushmaster caliber .223 rifle hidden in the trunk, positioned, ready to fire through the hole. The D.C. sniper case is a terrifying reminder of how the combination of organized madness and brutal randomness can paralyze a nation. John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo turned the most ordinary moments of people's lives into a deadly game. These two predators hidden in the shadows of a caprice, forever changed how America perceives safety. Story 4. The Night Watchman's Nightmare. In the summer of 1966, Chicago was a booming city, full of hope. But on one sweltering July night, an unimaginable brutality descended upon a quiet nurse's dormitory, forever staining the image of innocence. Richard Speck was a drifter, an alcoholic with a long criminal record of theft and violence. He arrived in Chicago hoping to find work, but instead, he sought victims. He was a large, tattooed man with a perpetually scowling, easily provoked demeanor. In the early hours of July 14, 1966, Speck broke into a townhouse on the South Side used as a dormitory for young female student nurses from South Chicago Community Hospital. 8 young nurses were asleep or preparing for bed when Speck appeared, armed with a knife. Speck held them captive one by one. Over the course of several terrifying hours, he moved the victims through the rooms, tying them up and threatening them. He maintained absolute control through sheer violence and fear. Speck then systematically tortured, sexually abused, and murdered each woman. Incredibly, one student nurse, Corazon Amaral, an immigrant from the Philippines, survived. While Speck was occupied in another room, Amaral managed to escape by crawling under a bed and hiding there until the attacker left. She remained still, listening to the screams and the eventual deadly silence. She only dared to emerge after she was sure the house was quiet. She crawled out of the room and called for help. Amaral's testimony was invaluable. She provided a detailed, clear description of the killer. Police launched a massive manhunt. Days later, an emergency room worker at South Chicago Community Hospital recognized a man brought in for an unsuccessful suicide attempt. That man was Speck. What confirmed his identity was a chilling tattoo on his arm, "Born to Raise Hell." Amaral was brought in and identified him through a one-way mirror, confirming he was the one who had massacred her friends. The case of Richard Speck was not just a mass murder. It was a shattering event that broke the innocence of a nation. Richard Speck taught America that sometimes the most terrifying monsters require no complex disguise, only pure brutality, and a single brave survivor to tell the truth. Story 5. The Bloody Blouse Tragedy. This chilling story takes us to Chicago in 1986, where a promising young student named Candace Trio, 20 years old, became the victim of a fateful encounter. Candace, a diligent young woman, had responded to a personal dating advertisement. She arranged to meet a man on May 12th, believing it could be the start of a new relationship. However, that was the last time she was seen alive. A few days later, Candace's body was found in a secluded wooded area near Lisle, Illinois. The gruesome detail was how the killer disposed of the body. Her remains were stuffed into an old chimney at an abandoned observation tower. This episode focuses on the confusing clues police found at the scene and the prolonged standstill of the case. The most critical piece of evidence was a blood-stained white blouse found a short distance from her body. This blouse, which did not belong to the victim, was believed to belong to the killer. But the DNA technology at the time was insufficient to clearly identify a suspect. Investigators followed every date Candace had arranged, but the man she met on her last night remained a phantom. The blouse became the symbol of this cold case, a tangible reminder of the killer who was at large. It wasn't until 2002, when forensic DNA techniques were advanced, that investigators were able to extract a full DNA profile from the bloody blouse. This profile matched a convicted felon named Stephen Fanady. Fanady, who had a prior conviction for sexual assault in Michigan, had been interviewed in 1986, but was not considered a primary suspect. This episode depicts the tense confrontation when police finally apprehended Fanady nearly 2 decades after the murder. Fanady initially denied the crime, but was ultimately charged and convicted. The Bloody Blouse tragedy is a horror story about the danger of trusting strangers in the modern world. It is also a testament to the persistence of forensic science and how justice, though delayed, finally found its way. Story 6. The Texas Ghost Killer. In the 1930s, in the small town of Elmendorf, not far from San Antonio, Texas, a man named Joe Ball became the subject of chilling urban legends. Ball was not a recluse. He was a local figure. He opened a small saloon and a bizarre attraction, an enclosure housing 6 large alligators. This episode will delve into the grimness of what transpired at Ball's establishment. His business was simple, but what made the place famous was his routine of feeding the alligators. Ball would host daily alligator feeding shows, drawing in tourists and locals. The trouble began when young women associated with Ball, including barmaids, former girlfriends, and even his wives, started vanishing without a trace. When questioned, Ball simply shrugged and claimed they had run off seeking a better life. The disappearance of at least 5 women eventually raised suspicions. It was particularly concerning that Ball was frequently seen hastily disposing of large suitcases and personal belongings. The horrific truth finally emerged when 2 local sheriffs began their investigation. They confronted Ball about the disappearances. Ball, who had always maintained a cool and indifferent demeanor, panicked when he realized he was cornered. He ran into his storeroom, grabbed a shotgun, and committed suicide in front of the officers. Ball's death was both a release and a dead end. Although he was dead, the truth about what happened to the victims remained vague. However, one of Ball's farmhands later confessed that he had helped Ball dismember and feed the victims' remains to the alligators to destroy the evidence. Investigators also found clothing and the dismembered remains of victims buried near the alligator pit. The nickname the Texas Ghost Killer describes the fear that spread throughout the community after people realized Ball was not just an eccentric man, but a serial killer. The Texas Ghost Killer is a classic American horror story about a monster hiding in plain sight who turned a local attraction into a torture chamber. Story 7. The Phantom of the Snow. Alaska is the land of majestic peaks, absolute freedom, and deep isolation. In the 1970s and 1980s, that raw beauty was turned into a private hunting ground by one man. He was Robert Hansen, a respected baker by trade, but a hidden human hunter. Robert Hansen was a successful baker in Anchorage, a family man, and a respected hunter in the community. He was an accomplished pilot and owned a small plane, which allowed him access to remote areas unreachable by road. Hansen began targeting women he believed no one would look for, primarily strippers and prostitutes in the Anchorage area. He used the promise of money or work to lure them, and then abducted them. Hansen's brutality lay in his unique killing method. He flew his victims to his remote cabin in the wilderness, miles outside Anchorage. After abusing them, he would strip them naked and release them into the frozen wilderness, where he would hunt them like animals. He used his hunting expertise and an ROF rifle to end their lives. The case began to link together in 1982 when one victim, Cindy Paulson, miraculously escaped from Hansen while he was asleep. She reported the incident to the police, providing a detailed description of Hansen and his plane. However, due to Paulson's background, her testimony was initially doubted. It wasn't until an FBI agent named Glenn Floth became involved that he began to connect the missing dancers to the skeletons found scattered across the wilderness. Floth noticed a pattern. The bodies were often found near private flight paths. The police finally secured a warrant to search Hansen's home. They found nothing in public view, but in the basement, they discovered a cache of weapons and, most importantly, a detailed aviation map with small dots marked in ink. The dots on the map corresponded to the locations of the yet-to-be-found bodies. Cornered by the undeniable evidence, Hansen eventually confessed to the murders. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 17 women and pointed out 12 burial sites. Some of the remaining victims were never found. The case of Robert Hansen demonstrated the terrifying nature of absolute isolation. He was the Phantom of the Snow, a man who used the boundless expanse of Alaska to carry out horrifying human hunting crimes, turning the freedom of the North into an icy prison and a tomb for forgotten women. Story 8. The BTK Killer. For more than 3 decades, the residents of Wichita, Kansas, lived under the shadow of a predator who called himself BTK, short for Bind, Torture, Kill. This killer was not only brutal, he was a narcissist who craved recognition, turning each murder into a sick performance. Dennis Rader had a completely normal exterior. He was a husband, a father, an animal control officer turned local code compliance officer, and an active member of his church. He volunteered in the community and served in the Boy Scouts organization. No one, including his family, suspected his dark double life. Rader's reign of terror began in 1974 with the murder of 4 members of the Otero family in their home. He continued to commit scattered murders, totaling 10 victims until 1991. What set Rader apart was his need to communicate. He began sending challenging letters and packages to the police and local media. In these handwritten letters, he detailed his crimes, complained about the lack of attention, and even suggested a name for himself: BTK. He viewed his killings as a kind of art, a way to demonstrate power and dominance. After his last murder in 1991, BTK suddenly went silent. He vanished from the public eye, turning into a phantom, but not because he had changed. He was satisfied with the fear he had sown. Over a decade later, in 2004, Rader abruptly broke the silence. He began sending more letters and packages. In one exchange with the police, Rader asked if he could send a floppy disk to the police, and if they could trace him through it. The police assured him that it would be safe. Rader, confident in his computer knowledge, sent the floppy disk. Police, with the help of digital forensics experts, found hidden metadata on the disk. This data showed that the disk was last used by someone named Dennis at the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Further investigation quickly led to Dennis Rader. Rader's arrest in 2005 shocked the nation. The kind, familiar man, neighbor, and community leader was the cold-blooded killer who had terrorized Wichita for 30 years. The BTK case is a chilling testament to how perfectly madness can be hidden behind the mask of normalcy. Dennis Rader craved notoriety, but the price was his freedom. He was an artistic killer who mistook his brutality for a masterpiece. Story 9. The Call from Hell. The summer of 1977, New York City, the city that never sleeps, was brought to a complete standstill by a mysterious killer. He called himself the Son of Sam, and he hunted one specific group of victims, young couples sitting in parked cars in quiet areas. Over the course of 1 year, from July 1976 to July 1977, the Son of Sam carried out 8 chilling shootings, killing 6 people and severely wounding several others. All the attacks shared one common trait. They were executed with a .44 caliber revolver, leading police and media to nickname the killer the .44 caliber killer. The murders occurred across Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Police launched a massive manhunt involving hundreds of detectives, but the killer always slipped away, hiding in the shadows of the busy neighborhoods. Women began cutting their hair short or dyeing it different colors, as the killer seemed to specifically target women with long, dark hair. What set this case apart was the killer's sick interaction with the public. He began sending letters to the police and to the famous journalist Jimmy Breslin, signing off as Son of Sam. In the cryptic letters, he described his crimes, mocked the police, and claimed he was driven by a demonic spirit living in his neighbor's dog named Sam. He claimed the dog, and its owner, Sam, was ordering him to kill. This added a layer of madness and fear to the hunt. The final murder occurred on July 31st, 1977, killing Stacy Moskowitz and wounding her boyfriend. The event placed immense pressure on the New York Police Department. The investigation finally focused on David Berkowitz, a 24-year-old postal worker. The crucial lead came from a parking ticket found near the scene of the final murder. This ticket led police to Berkowitz's distinctive yellow Ford Galaxy. When Berkowitz was arrested, he did not resist. He immediately confessed, declaring, "I am Sam. I am Sam." He admitted to carrying out all 8 shootings. New York breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the tale of his madness and the demonic dog forever haunted the city. The case of David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, concluded one of the most terrifying periods in New York City history. It is a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not hidden in the deep woods, but are ordinary neighbors driven by insane delusions. Story 11. The Cascade Killer. In the 1990s, the remote highways and forested areas along the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest became the hunting ground for a particularly cruel killer who gave himself the chilling nickname Happy Face Killer. Keith Hunter Jesperson was a long-haul truck driver who exploited his job to travel constantly across multiple states: Washington, Oregon, California, Florida, etc., allowing him to kill and dispose of bodies easily without detection. The most horrific part of this case is how Jesperson exposed his own crimes. After killing his first victim, an innocent woman was arrested for the crime. Angry that he was not being recognized, Jesperson began writing anonymous letters to the police and media, confessing details about the murders. He signed them as the Happy Face Killer and included a small drawing of a smiley face to mock the investigators. This episode will focus on the contrast between the ordinary appearance of a hard-working truck driver and his savage nature. Jesperson often targeted vulnerable women, especially hitchhikers or those working in the sex industry, whom he believed would be less likely to be sought after. Jesperson's depravity lay not just in the number of his victims. He admitted to killing at least 8 people, and police believe the number could be higher, but also in how he used the media system to build his criminal brand. The years-long struggle of the police with the anonymous letters turned the case into a public relations nightmare where the killer controlled the narrative. It wasn't until Jesperson's former girlfriend recognized the handwriting and details in the letters that he was finally arrested. Keith Hunter Jesperson was ultimately convicted of multiple murders and is serving life sentences. The Cascade Killer is a terrifying story about the killer's invisibility on long-distance routes and the horror of a murderer who promotes his own crimes. Story 12. The Kitty Cabin Massacre. In April 1981, at the remote resort town of Kitty, nestled deep in California's Sierra Nevada mountains, a horrific tragedy occurred at Cabin 28. This case is chilling due to its brutal nature and the lack of clear motive or known assailants. Sue Sharp and 5 of her children, along with some friends, were renting Cabin 28. On the morning of April 12th, Sue's eldest daughter, Sheila Sharp, who had spent the night at a neighbor's house, returned and discovered the crime scene. The scene inside Cabin 28 was beyond imagination. Sue Sharp, 48, and her son John Sharp, 15, along with his friend Dana Wingate, 17, were found brutally murdered in the living room. The victims were bound with electrical wire and medical tape, then stabbed multiple times with knives and beaten with a hammer. Tina Sharp, 12, the youngest daughter, had vanished completely. Police believed she had been abducted. The mystery was compounded by the fact that Sue's 2 youngest sons and another one of their friends, who were sleeping in a separate bedroom in the cabin, were unharmed and seemingly unheard the massacre. This episode focuses on the chaos and confusing clues at the scene. Police initially handled the case poorly, failing to properly secure the crime scene, which resulted in the loss of crucial evidence. The horrifying images of the bodies, along with the scattered instruments of violence, haunted investigators. 3 years later, the mystery deepened when portions of Tina Sharp's skull were found hundreds of miles away from Kitty, near the Feather Falls area, indicating the killer had moved her. For decades, this cold case has yielded countless theories. The killer was a local, a stranger, or one of the neighbors. It wasn't until the 2000s that investigators found a decisive piece of evidence. Medical tape found at the scene contained the DNA of a known suspect. The Kitty Cabin Massacre remains a chilling story of evil erupting suddenly in isolation. It highlights the terrifying truth that the most brutal crimes are sometimes the hardest to solve, leaving behind prolonged chaos and suffering for the survivors and the community. Story 13. The Missing Highway Victims. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a dark shadow fell over the remote coastal highways and forested areas of Northern California and Southern Oregon. Smitty's Trailside is the unofficial name given to a series of disappearances that appeared random but shared a chilling motif. This episode will focus on the disappearance of young people who often stopped at rest areas or went hiking in isolated spots. The predator exploited the comfort and beauty of nature to ambush victims. One of the most famous cases is the disappearance of the couple Tracy Brown and Kim Davis. They were a young couple heading towards Oregon, and their abandoned van was found in a deserted parking lot near Highway 101. Everything inside the car seemed undisturbed, but both individuals had vanished. This was followed by the disappearance of Stephen Pye, who vanished after hitchhiking. Years later, another vehicle belonging to a different missing woman was found. This connection reinforced the belief that a single serial killer was operating along the long stretch of Highway 101. The horror of the Smitty's Trailside series lies in the lack of evidence and the large number of victims who were never found. Investigators struggled to determine whether this was the work of one individual or multiple people, but the modus operandi suggested a patient predator who knew how to effectively dispose of evidence in the dense forests. This episode explores the theories surrounding these disappearances, including stories about cults or hidden nomadic individuals. However, the most prevalent theory remains that of a truck driver or local individual who used their knowledge of the terrain to ambush and hide bodies effectively. The Missing Highway Victims is a haunting horror story about travelers becoming victims of what lurks in the deep woods. It underscores the terrifying truth that remote trails and beautiful natural scenery can sometimes hide the most heinous crimes. Story 14. The Spider Killer. Los Angeles in the 1950s was a city brimming with hope, where thousands of young women yearned to become models or movie actresses. It was this very thirst for fame that was exploited by a sick predator, Harvey Glatman. Glatman did not look like a murderer. He was a short, skinny man with a timid appearance. However, he constructed a perfect facade. A professional freelance photographer, always seeking new faces. This episode will delve into Glatman's brutal modus operandi. He typically arranged meetings with female victims, mostly amateur models or aspiring actresses, through personal ads or small magazines. He convinced them to come to his apartment for test shoots. Once the victim arrived, Glatman would pull out a gun or knife, overpowering them. The most haunting aspect was his photographic ritual. He would bind the victims with rope and adhesive tape, gag them, and then take a series of photos depicting their terror and helplessness. He used these photographs to prolong the psychological control and torture. The nickname, the Spider Killer, originated from the way he meticulously bound his victims, leaving them completely immobile, much like prey caught in a spider's web. His first identified victim was Judith Doe in 1957, followed by Shirley Bridgeford and Ruth Mercado. Glatman didn't just kill, he killed to satisfy his thirst for sexual violence and sick need for control. Glatman's killing spree ended in 1958 when he attempted to abduct his fourth victim, Lorraine Vigil. Fortunately, Vigil bravely fought back and managed to escape, attracting the attention of passers-by. Glatman was immediately arrested. During the investigation, police found hundreds of chilling Polaroid photographs of the victims, including those he had murdered. The Spider Killer is a horror story about the betrayal of trust. It highlights the bitter truth that in Hollywood, where dreams are sold, sometimes the most terrifying thing is the man behind the camera. Story 15. The Lonely Hearts Killer. In the late 1980s, on their farm in Mooresville, Missouri, Ray and Faye Copeland constructed a cold-blooded serial killing scheme, exploiting the loneliness and desperation of single men. Ray Copeland, an older man constantly struggling financially, devised a sophisticated fraud scheme. He and his wife began placing ads in local newspapers and agricultural magazines, seeking single men, often drifters or those without family ties, to hire as farm hands. This episode will focus on the double betrayal. Financial fraud. Ray hired these men to buy cattle for him using bad checks. As soon as the men began to realize they were participating in an illegal activity, they immediately vanished. Destruction of life. When these men became a burden or a threat, Ray murdered them and buried their bodies on his own farm or nearby areas. What made the case horrifying was the involvement of Faye Copeland. She, seemingly a gentle farm wife, was accused of assisting her husband in the murders and covering up the crimes. This episode explores the notebooks found in the Copeland home, where Faye had recorded the names of the victims and cryptic notes about erasing their names. The breakthrough in the case occurred when one of the hired men, Jack McCormick, escaped and reported to the police. McCormick's testimony led to a search of the Copeland farm. Investigators found personal belongings and eventually 5 bodies of different men buried on Copeland's property. The bodies were hastily buried, only a few feet deep, confirming the scale of the couple's crimes. Ray and Faye Copeland were arrested and became the oldest couple ever convicted of serial murder in American history. The case shocked the nation, highlighting the terrifying truth that extreme evil can hide behind the doors of any home, and that killers can be the people the community trusts the most. The Lonely Hearts Killer is a horror story about greed and exploited loneliness, turning a peaceful farmhouse into a burial ground for desperate hearts. Story 16. The Man in the Walls. This episode takes us to Townsend, Massachusetts in 1987 with the case of Daniel LaPlante. However, his chilling story began even earlier, with acts of extreme stalking that went far beyond mere surveillance. LaPlante was a young, disturbed man who developed a sick obsession with the Andrews family. The story became terrifying when members of the Andrews family began hearing strange noises and noticing unusual signs in their home. This episode will focus on the horror of being stalked inside one's own home. Secret infiltration. LaPlante had discovered hidden spaces and hollow walls within the Andrews house. He used the walls and the attic to live inside the house without the family knowing for weeks. He moved in the dark, stole food, and even left cryptic, chilling messages. Psychological terror. He terrified family members, leading them to believe the house was haunted. Story 17. The Unabomber. From 1978 to 1995, the United States was terrorized by a series of mail bombings carried out by a mysterious individual. The FBI dubbed the perpetrator Unabomb, short for University and Airline Bomber, before he was finally referred to as the Unabomber. This episode focuses on the stark contrast between the killer's brilliant past and his savage isolation. Theodore Kaczynski was a mathematical prodigy, a Harvard graduate, and the youngest professor ever at UC Berkeley. However, in his 20s, he abandoned academia for a secluded, off-grid cabin in Montana without electricity or running water. The prolonged terror campaign. Targets. Kaczynski sent a total of 16 mail bombs to various targets, including university professors, airline executives, and others associated with modern technology. Casualties. The bombings killed 3 people and injured 23 others, causing prolonged fear and changing how mail was handled across the United States. This episode explores the difficulties faced by FBI investigators. Kaczynski was an incredibly intelligent and elusive figure, fabricating his devices with common materials, leaving no fingerprints, and mailing bombs from various cities to conceal his origins. The turning point in the case came in 1995, when Kaczynski sent a 35,000-word manifesto to major newspapers titled Industrial Society and Its Future. In it, he harshly condemned technology and industrial society, justifying his violence. The FBI and the Department of Justice made an unprecedented decision to publish the manifesto. They hoped someone would recognize the writing style or characteristic ideas. The reluctant hero. Ted's brother, David Kaczynski, read the manifesto and recognized the language, ideas, and even specific phrases that matched Ted's old letters. David reported his brother, a painful act that led to Ted's arrest at his remote cabin in 1996. The Unabomber is a horror story about how a genius can turn his hatred for technology into a violent crusade against the modern world. It is a testament to the terrifying truth that the most dangerous killers are sometimes the smartest. Story 18. The Green River Killer. In the 1980s, the area surrounding King County, Washington, especially the banks of the Green River, became the burial ground for a sick serial killer. Gary Ridgway, a truck painter working at Kenworth, murdered dozens of women, primarily young and vulnerable individuals, over the course of 2 decades. This episode focuses on the prolonged and incredibly difficult hunt for the Green River Killer. The horrific beginning. Ridgway's first victims were found near the Green River in 1982 and 1983. He typically targeted runaway girls, sex workers, or young transient women in the Seattle-Tacoma area. He chose those he believed would be the least missed. The cunning concealment. Ridgway had a completely normal appearance, a married, hard-working man living in the community. He knew how to dispose of bodies in remote areas, leading police to initially believe that multiple killers were active. He often moved bodies after burial to obscure the trail, making identification and linking the cases incredibly complex. The investigation became the largest manhunt in King County history, but the case remained stalled for years. Throughout this period, Ridgway continued to kill. The breakthrough did not come from traditional investigative work, but from forensic science. In the 2000s, DNA analysis techniques had improved. Police re-examined preserved semen samples from the 1980s and finally identified a DNA profile that matched Gary Ridgway. Ridgway had long been a suspect, even interviewed and swabbed in 1987, but there was insufficient evidence to charge him at the time. After his arrest in 2001, Ridgway agreed to a plea bargain. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he agreed to point out the locations of the missing bodies. The details he provided revealed the brutality and scale of his crime. He confessed to killing at least 49 women, although investigators believe the true number could exceed 70. The Green River Killer is a chilling reminder of the persistence of investigators and the horror of a predator who hid in plain sight within society for decades. It provides a tragic conclusion to the series, emphasizing that the most terrifying phantoms can be living among us. Thank you for listening to this series. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear the next series.